Welcome everyone to this week's episode of Get Real with ECAR, and today we are featuring Bob DeCosmo, who owns TenantTracks and is also the president of the Connecticut Property Owners Alliance. Welcome, Bob.
Hi, Susie. Thank you for inviting me. Really appreciate the opportunity.
Really good to have you. I know you are involved in a topic that's been very difficult during the coronavirus, right? So with landlords and property owners, it's been a tough year for everybody. Let's talk about that.
Sure. It's a popular topic in the landlord circles. Yeah, COVID has really changed the industry. And as you know, evictions have been pretty much stopped since March in Connecticut. And there's been a lot of conversations. How do we keep people from becoming homeless because of the virus? And they've come up with some solutions. Some funding has been made available to help tenants catch up on their back rent so they could stay in their homes. We're getting a little bit of misleading or the information that we're getting is really good news, because what we're seeing is most of the tenants are in fact paying rent.
That's what I'm hearing. Is that also what you're hearing?
Yeah, absolutely. That the amount of tenants that really are not paying is small.
Okay, that's good.
I think we looked at the National Multifamily Housing Council for statistics, and they sample about 11.5 million units a month. And yeah, we're like within 1.5% of last year's numbers, 1%. So it's not this pandemic of the tsunami of all this non-payment that just didn't show up.
Let me ask you this, Bob. I'm not even sure about this. Are people still getting unemployment or any pandemic unemployment? Is that what's carrying them and the reason why they're still able to pay rent? Or
the Fed money dried up on August 1, the 600 a week. There was a small period of time in Connecticut where they gave a supplemental check, and I think it was like 300 or 400 a week. It was small, but that lasted for 4 or 5 weeks. So the federal money has been out of the system for a few months, and the state money dried up about a month and a half to 2 months ago.
And do you know what the unemployment rate is currently?
Well, I do know that when the Fed money dried up, a lot of people went back to work, which raises another set of questions. But at the moment, no. But I did hear that we made a big, significant cut back into that unemployment.
So, okay, so in Connecticut, the executive orders do allow for restaurants and businesses to remain open with limited service. Gyms are still open. So what do we and the casinos are open. So we're not being significantly impacted at this moment with jobs. Is that right? Or, I mean, I'm wondering how people are paying their rent, with what money, if they're not working, but maybe most of them are working.
Most of them, I think, are. If you really, I feel sorry for the restaurant industry, the hospitality industry. I mean, I was out last evening to dinner, and I mean, there was just nobody in the place. It was so sad to walk into this. They had all the seating spaced out. They're a big enough restaurant, but still, no one's going out to the extent where they used to.
Perhaps the EIDL loans and the PPP loans are helping cover businesses to be able to pay the employees that are probably, like, their hours are cut back or stuff like that.
Yeah, I would imagine of the people that I knew that received funding, they still have surplus funds available to them. So
okay,
that was a tremendous shot in the arm for local businesses.
Yep.
And they couldn't survive they wouldn't be able to survive without that.
Okay, so we've established that people are paying their rent, which is, first of all, really good news. And so landlords and property owners are not really negatively affected by coronavirus. Is that
It's a
stretch?
case by case. You know, the more, I don't want to use the word, the more sophisticated landlord, the one that does diligence and they do a good background check and they have a criteria, those guys are doing well. There's very little impact on those guys. The smaller mom and pops that let's say are not as extensive in doing their research, those are the ones that are having problems because they're renting to the tenants that, let's say, are more likely to try to take advantage of a situation.
Are you seeing that at all?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's, and I feel so bad for these people because, you know, right now there's nothing we can say to make it better for them. Because the reality is courts are still closed for most evictions. They're allowing any of the cases that predated the March orders to finally move through. And you can move forward a serious nuisance, which, you know, that usually involves an arrest or physical violence on a property. It's very hard to prove a serious nuisance complaint.
Yeah.
And then the other one is that you have to have documented evidence of 6 months of non-payment before you could begin an eviction now. But they have to also sign the waiver that says that they're not COVID impacted, the federal waiver. So all the tenant has to do is say I'm COVID impacted, and those cases are stopped. What
do you think is going to happen in January? Like you said, they can't really lift that moratorium in the dead of winter.
That's kind of where I'm thinking that's where it's going to be. You're going to see some of the calls that I've been on with legislators that understand sort of our side of the discussion. They are using the terms that certain tenants have been emboldened by the fact that there's the moratorium, and then combined with the police accountability bill, which passed this July or August. So they want to look to expand and allow nuisance evictions to be brought forward along with serious nuisance.
Well, that makes sense, right?
I'm good with that as long as there's an attempt to pay or you're trying to pay. Because again, landlords don't make money on empty apartments. So it's not that they want to get up and start the eviction. The last thing they want to do is begin an eviction. So they're always looking for solutions. And I think we might be able to find more money for these landlords so the tenants can stay and catch up.
I know that's what NAR is working on, some kind of legislation to help landlords. Do you know much about that? Is that going to get any traction in Connecticut or federally?
Well, I'm sure we're going to have legislation in Connecticut proposed. I'm aware that we're probably going to look at, you know, some of the stuff that was going on in Massachusetts where they literally wanted to cancel rent payments for 12 months, cancel mortgage payments. There was legislation that came out of their housing committee.
What?
Yeah, cancel rent, cancel mortgages. It didn't cancel property taxes or didn't cancel insurance, utilities. It came out with 80 co-sponsors of the housing committee. Came out of the committee. Yeah, I got involved in Massachusetts last July, and it was like a kid going into a toy store for me up there. And it was had all the earmarks it was going forward. But one thing Massachusetts had was about 5,000 landlords that were affiliated with different landlord groups, but not one of those groups was present at the state capitol. They hadn't been in the capitol for 20 to 30 years, I was told. And we quickly, I just, you know, I kind of just connected the dots, and you know, you guys call up these people, and just I was like a traffic cop for you know, 4 or 5 weeks. I had a blast. We stopped it dead in their tracks. The bill made it to the floor for a vote, and they got 21 votes. It came out with 80 co-sponsors, but when they went for the floor vote, it only had 21 supporters.
That's ridiculous.
That's what grassroots. That's what effective grassroots can do in this arena, and that's why I always try to get people to come up to the Capitol or get involved, because there's just a tremendous lack of information that these legislators are operating on. Most of them just don't understand what's going on at the street level.
What are some of the other things that you have been lobbying this past year or more?
We're literally looking forward to January. It's gonna be, there's gonna be an awful lot of, let's say, legislation that'll have a bad impact. I say bad, negative. One of the proposals is they want to supply every tenant that's being evicted with a free legal aid lawyer, which you start to look at now. A good legal aid attorney literally extends the time frames. So if an eviction normally would take 42 days, now you may be looking at 92 days.
Oh, wow.
And there's another little wrinkle, but a good lawyer will look at the written lease. And most of these leases you buy, over at Staples, or they don't stand up to challenge. So there may be some unfair trade practices that were in these leases. And we've seen where the tenants, literally the owner was forced to withdraw the eviction, and they promptly received the bill from legal aid for the services rendered to the tenant, prevailing parties entitled to recovery of costs.
Wow.
So I mean that's a concern, because again, in between us and all your members, understanding is the governor doesn't like that legislation. The governor's very sensitive now to the fact that he's got to run for re-election in 2 years. And I think the landlords made it really clear to the governor, we're very unhappy that we had no input into his policy decisions. And I think, again, the criticism that we're talking about is, we had drug gangs, dealers living in properties that the owners lived in with their children. And we had no ability to get this element out of this environment. And it was, and again, I got the calls, Susie.
Is that an education thing though, for the landlord to, screen better and not let a potential problem?
It is, absolutely. And it's, you don't want to sound discouraging, but again, the one that I'm thinking about, it was a single mom, came from Jamaica, worked hard to buy a 3-family, and literally had the 3rd floor empty, and met somebody that was trying to quote unquote get her life turned around. And she was on a program that was going to pay the rent, and she didn't do any background check. And that woman immediately, after getting the apartment, 2 months later, broke whatever those rules were for that program, and they stopped paying the rent. And then they wouldn't answer the phone calls from the owner.
Oh boy. Wow.
Yeah, and that just got worse from there, because in December, her boyfriend came out of jail and he was a drug dealer. So
That's
all
terrible.
that.
I have a question about raising rent during COVID. Are there any rules about that you're aware of?
Oh, none that I'm aware of, but again, be careful, because the courts are going to lean heavily in favor of the tenant. So if you're trying to pass along a $25 rent increase or a $200 rent increase, it's going to look a lot different from the judge if the tenant refuses to pay that increase.
Mm-hmm.
And again, I've unfortunately, there's a lot of landlords that you choose the words, but I just heard someone right now that's going to be evicted because they had issues with COVID. They did lose their income. They never stopped paying the rent. They're partially paying here, but they paid something every month, and they're catching up. And now that landlord wants to evict them because they were late during the COVID. And there was a realtor that asked me the question. I said, one, I'm not an attorney, but two, I wouldn't want to be that landlord if, let's say, I or somebody else that knows the laws wanted to represent that tenant. I mean, yeah. So
yeah,
there's a strong need, and maybe we can talk about this, because the rental housing business is a great business, but people don't have the right understanding of what it really is. It's not an investment. You really have an obligation to the tenants. You've got an obligation to your neighbors, and maybe that's fruitful grounds to discuss creating some program, with ECAR, where we could do some of these boot camps or continual.
Yeah, happy to do it. I have another question for people that are investors, landlords, which may be some of our members. Given that the market is conducive right now to a seller, you could, get some more equity in your home, and you might want to sell one of these properties that has a tenant in it. What should they be looking out for now? Can you put your property on the market? I don't know if it's even COVID related or not, but it is a good market. So if you have a tenant in it, what are some things to be careful of or be aware of when you want to sell?
We just ran through it where if the occupant doesn't want to let the prospective new buyer walk through.
Yeah,
So,
I had a call on that last week.
Yeah, and we kind of got
because of COVID, right? Because the caller I had was a compromised health tenant and didn't want. Yes, so talk about that. What is the deal there?
Well, it goes back to any right of entry from the landlord. People don't understand it. Once you give the keys to the tenant, literally it's their apartment. And you can come in there and say, I want to come in once a month to inspect. If they say, I don't want you in, you have no right to go into that apartment.
Even though the lease says you can market the property and.
Yeah. And the solution, and this is really where, you get into the fine detail. You have to go to court and have a judge sign a court order allowing you to enter. We had the debate when we were passing the bed bug legislation. Literally, if we have a 3-family house and we've got to go in to exterminate the bed bugs, you got to do all 3 apartments. If the second floor says no, what do we do? You can't do the first and third because you're not going to kill the bed bugs. And the answer was you had to go to court and get a court order from the judge.
Wow.
To gain entry to exterminate for bed bugs.
Wow, that's interesting. What I told the caller last week is to first of all look at what's in your lease. What did you sign? What did you agree to as far as letting people in? And then add the layer of COVID. What are the governor's executive orders on what is allowed? Real estate is essential. So it's not a no right out of the gate, but social distancing, whatever the protocols are for that essential business of real estate, and then like combine the two, and then you might have a better idea of what your rights are as a tenant. And then I would say talk to your landlord, but
right, common sense, communication, be nice, be polite, all that goes a long way. But if push comes to shove and the tenant says no way, and they're going to say because of COVID, people wonder if the judge would, sign that order.
Do you talk to in the property owner alliance? Do they talk about that as an issue, that tenants don't want to let people in when a property is on for sale?
Fortunately,
are people putting their I'm sorry. Are people putting their property on the market?
That issue really hasn't come up. There's an awful lot of social media activity within the landlord community. There's a lot of 2 or 3 groups that are on Facebook that are active daily.
What are the names of them in case anybody wanted to join?
The Connecticut Landlords and Investors. CT Landlords and Investors is one. There's another Connecticut Wholesaling Houses. We have the CTPOA. We're on Facebook. There's another one, Landlords, Investors, and Agents. And there's good information. There's another group for Connecticut Property Managers.
Okay.
So, a lot of, years ago, these people would have to go to a meeting once a month to get information. Today, they're just on social media getting the information. So in some respects, it's hurt us in terms of, having a membership base, because you have to come out, and it was like the social interaction, where today they're just dialing it in on the computer and getting access to the information. But, so the market is doing fantastic. People are
How's your business? Are you noticing the market being fantastic in the way of more applications coming through your business?
We in April, when this first hit, um, we were down 20, almost 25% in report volume. So we thought it was going to be a disaster. And in May, we just broke all the records we ever had. We did the best month ever in May. We're seasonal, so right now we're definitely in our slow season because November, December, I mean, you know, the holidays are on people's minds. We're actually right on last year's numbers. So, you know, we thought it was going to be, I thought it was going to be worse, I honestly, and knowing that the courts are locked down in Connecticut still, and we're up in Massachusetts a little bit more than, we're moving into Massachusetts as well. So, and they're operating under the federal moratorium, but they were locked down until October. So I'm hoping next year that, you know, once we get past the springtime, we'll see a lot more, because there are people that are living for free and have the capacity to pay rent, and they just don't want to. And that's a small segment, but yeah, that's you know, the guy hasn't lost his job, but he's like, hey, COVID, don't bother me, I'm not paying. And
Catherine, you brought up a statistic earlier. The unemployment rate was what, 7.5, or what did you say it was?
I'm not sure what the unemployment was.
It was as of September from the Connecticut Department of Labor, it was 7.8 in September, but I haven't seen anything for more current.
Sounds like Connecticut has fared pretty well, all things considered.
Yeah. You know, I talked to people from other parts of the country that, you know, they didn't have the executive orders basically, and you know, it's kind of like, I don't want to say business as usual, but it's more business as usual than we have here.
Yeah.
But, you know, as a whole, I think we're fine. Now we've got a vaccine.
Yeah, I think 2021 is going to look up. If you had to project anything in the way of this topic for next year, what do you think we should be expecting?
Well, you know, we're going to try to push something that every landlord's been looking for forever, which is payment into escrow if you're going to be evicted. We have a real opportunity now to have.
What does that mean exactly? I'm sorry.
Well, what it means is that if you don't want to pay rent, like we just talked about, we want the court to hold the rent while we're in the dispute. So pay your rent into the court's escrow account, and then let's talk then you could do whatever you want. If you don't have the rent to pay into the court, then what we want is the court to schedule your case in a priority fashion over all the other cases, because we want to get you in front of the mediator to find out what's going on. If you don't have your rent, what's the problem? So let's get those cases moved on a fast track, versus the cases that there's a dispute, but the money is sitting there in the escrow account. Because as long as the money's there, we know that there's an opportunity to recover it. And I think that
seems very reasonable.
it was presented every year at the Capitol until 2009. I think in 2010, we put it in 10, I stopped pushing it because every year it just never got anywhere. But I talked to a couple of different mayors from different cities, and they says, Bob, you're presenting it all wrong. And he tell me, he says, don't make it a landlord-tenant issue. Make it a societal nuisance problem, where these are the people that are creating the problems in the neighborhood. These are the ones that are calling the fire marshal and calling the health department, and frame it that way, and frame it more that the cities are spending money on this element, and that everybody should be looking to be accountable. That's an interesting idea, to make it more of a help the city's approach, because again, fire marshals have to inspect the schools, the restaurants. They don't want to be called into every time that the landlords file an eviction notice, but that's what happens a lot of the time. You file a notice, they're calling the fire marshal.
What percentage of the CPOA is realtors versus investors versus property managers?
Predominantly landlords. Yeah, not too many realtors.
Okay.
We're actually in a completely different world right now with the landlord groups. I say it's a complete rebuild, I'm seeing that people want to, what we do at the Capitol, very few people care about it. And there's really no reason to join our group, because if we're gonna change the laws, it's not just for our members, we change the laws for everybody.
Mhm.
So if our number one is we're protecting your rights at the Capitol, whether we win or lose, they're gonna get impacted whether they're a member or not. So we are now looking more to becoming a facilitator of business services around the real estate industry, helping to market legitimate businesses to the groups of landlords and do it in a targeted fashion. So, and I think that's really where we'll be able to get then a broader base. And that will also bring in the homeowners, because homeowners need a handyman, or they need someone to.
Yeah, kind of a
Rotor
resource
or-
center.
So it's, trying to transition this over. There's two different landlord groups in Connecticut. We've been working together for the last 2 years, 2.5 years. So I'm taking more of the lead on the member services and the Coalition of Property Owners, CCOPO. They're going to be the guys on the front lines with the policy.
And
they've
in
got
any
good
case,
policy.
your TenantTracks is probably the most widely recognized screening service in Connecticut. Is that a fair statement?
Thank you. Yeah, it came from the background that, and the mindset that one eviction was one too many. Because, as a property manager, and it was just every month, it was just part of what we did. And when we saw that the fact that several of the courts were not even on any electronic database.
Right.
And then I started looking at how the quality of the information just wasn't there. One thing that we really try to do is we try to find those needles in the haystack. People change their names. So when you're doing a data input on a last name, well, if they got married 2 years ago, you're never going to find that eviction unless you're employing alias name logic, in which we buy extra reports, and then we find all these other names, and we've got this additional address, so we're able to match things up. But that's also because we have our own databases. And I just bought the entire eviction database out of Massachusetts for the same purpose.
Wow, really?
So
So
we have.
I was going to say, Zillow is one way to vet a tenant, but I'm suspecting that their application process is quite a bit different than your screening process.
They don't have the complete database of evictions from Connecticut. They won't have that until 2024. So there's going to be those cases that they just won't have. There's a few different companies that have the national criminal database, and one company that sells or wholesales data, it's called CIC. 7 years after the date of first judicial involvement, they truncate the case, including hard felonies like murder and arson. So, we bought data from them at one point, and we spent the whole process. I never asked the question because there is no statute of limitations on criminal. We had that discussion last year. But for them to make that 7 years arbitrary on their end, I mean, that's just unspeakable amount of risks when you've got people that have 18 and 15 convictions over 20 years. You want to see that whole 20-year history of work.
Yeah.
So the quality of the data is really, it's suspect, and I think part of what TenantTracks deals with is it's the old quality versus convenience. Because you can go on a lot of these integrated software platforms and they do tenant screening. But,
How do you get integrated?
we're talking to one company now. We have to buy our way in, and we buy our way in, and is it really worth it?
Are you integrated with Smart MLS or no?
No, I would certainly like to sit down and talk with them. Because again, we come down to we'll put up our quality of our information against anybody. And I know what we built, and I don't think anybody has what we have. They're all selling the same report. It's literally, you go to TransUnion and you buy your report through TransUnion, and then they just put a new front end on it, or they paint it differently, and it's, all these different colors. We use TransUnion as well, but we don't use their platform. We built our own software, and we don't use their eviction database because in Connecticut, it doesn't have those 7 offline courts out of 15, and it doesn't do alias name bookings. So why?
And every time someone runs an application, does that build your database as well?
No, we don't store the,
Okay.
because we have the data. We update the
Okay,
database
okay.
every night.
How does someone get in touch with, if someone has, wants to use your service, how do you do it? What's the website? What's the contact information?
Well, hopefully it's going to be, go to the ECAR homepage. We'll, because yeah, we've been busy. We've been looking at product. One thing I just want to talk about with the realtors is I've got landlords that will tell me when they put their own ads in on Craigslist, the quality of the tenant is rock bottom. When they go through a realtor to rent their apartments, they're getting a much higher quality applicant. So we're going to use that sort of as marketing. Don't waste your time on Craigslist. Use one of these realtors. They use TenantTracks, and again, try to drive business to where you're getting a more professional.
Catherine, can you show us how we can get to TenantTracks on ECAR?
Yes. Give me 1
In the
second.
meantime, it's tenanttracks.com, Bob?
Yes.
TRACKS?
TenantTracks.com.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, we've made a lot of different improvements. We actually now allow for our landlord users on the bigger platform. They could report every month now to the credit bureau how the tenant pays. So the tenants could actually now get good credit established by paying your rent on time. And we just build that in. There's no charge for that. On the other side, we have
That's
a collection agency.
That's really great.
So, we're looking at the add-on services. So it makes it easier, makes it more, a little bit more beneficial. We're looking to actually now allow for you to import your lease. And if you accept the tenant, then the tenant's information will sort of be auto-populated in your lease, and then you can store it and you can print it. So
What happens if somebody leaves? Like, what happens if there's a divorce and one stays in the unit and the other one leaves? Should they redo the lease, or if they continue to live there, like, is there anything to be careful of or watch out for there?
Well, if you're signing the lease, the owner doesn't have to let you off. The security deposit doesn't get returned and split. The security deposit stays with the apartment. I know a lot of times people say, well, I'm moving out, I want half the deposit back. And there's no obligation for the owner to give back half the deposit.
Oh, there isn't. So let's say I had a tenant who's been with me for 5 years. One of the parties leaves, they get divorced, but the other party wants to stay. You got 5 years of rental history, an accruing security deposit of a couple months.
Yep.
And the one that's staying wants a new lease without the partner who's not there anymore.
Yep.
So I, as the landlord, have no responsibility to give half of that deposit back to the other half and get another one from the one staying.
There's nothing that compels the owner to give it back. That's, again, you try to be polite and courteous and have that conversation, because most of the landlords are going to understand, but they're not going to want to be exposed by giving back 50% of the deposit without getting that money reimbursed from the other.
Is there any liability that the party who's no longer living there will come back and legally challenge for it?
No, because they agreed to that. But the problem is that if that tenant that stays on or stays behind stops paying, and they're on the lease, and that lease becomes, part of a collection action, that first tenant, if they're not released, may wind up having a collection account filed on their credit.
Okay. Interesting.
Most of the landlords that I, deal with would be more than happy to work out a new deal. There are some landlords that I know that would say, no, those are the guys that typically give us a bad reputation.
Okay. All right, Catherine, what have you got there? Where are we right now?
Okay, so this is the members landing page. So when our member comes on and logs in, this is the landing page that they get, and they'll click on the access your ECAR, CTR, NAR discounts. And what that's going to do is actually open up a PDF, which hopefully you can see it, but right there is TenantTracks. All the information about it. We have another PDF that gives more information, but your website and everything is right there as well. So they can go ahead and sign up right from this PDF.
Okay.
We've got we're working on an updated marketing package strictly for the realtors. I know a couple of the boards that we used to do business with merged, kind of went out. And I do like the idea though of literally talking to the landlord community about, don't waste your time, on some of these. Just use the realtors, use these guys that use our service, because you'll find, the laws better than these other people. You're constantly being updated with information from CAR and NAR about, current events.
And although the realtor is not responsible for the behavior of the tenant, you're saying that they are more likely to have a more reliable, responsible tenant because of the resources they have, such as TenantTracks, to vet a healthy tenant.
And I also suspect part of it, Susie, is as a tenant, they understand that realtors are professionals. And if you're kind of that lower quality tenant that's got a lot of prior history, you're not going to want to walk into a realtor office,
Right.
knowing that they're going to charge you an application fee and want you to produce documents.
You know what I love about what you just said? The realtor brand, the realtor logo, the R, that's who we are. Everyone just takes us for granted, but it resonates professionalism.
Yeah, absolutely.
That logo and our brand resonates professionalism and ethics. And so people that aren't ethical aren't going to gravitate.
Right. And that saves everybody time.
Yeah.
And
probably money.
And again, it doesn't help sort of at the street level where you've got people that, again, will put an ad in on Craigslist and rent the apartment over the phone. Absolutely, sure, it's available. I can see tomorrow, without doing any background checks. And that's kind of where you get that constant flow of tenant destruction in these neighborhoods.
Well, I'm pretty sure that our members use you.
A lot
Would
of
you
them
agree?
do. We're reevaluating this year the whole chaos of the year. Because I was laid off for a period of time, so I'm catching up. I do want to reaffiliate with you guys as a vendor, and I'm going to have a check for you for the royalties that incurred this year. Didn't forget about you.
Yeah, I don't know if our members know that every time someone comes, uses TenantTracks, ECAR does get a rev share. A small portion of that does come to the association. So it's a win-win for everyone, and I appreciate our partnership. I don't know that there's much more to talk about. I do want to remind our members, Catherine, you can go ahead and remove that, but I want to remind our members that we have an upcoming fundraiser to help the community. It's right behind me. Let's see, community benefit raffle virtually from a distance. We will be promoting it. You can go onto your portal in my ECAR and donate. If you donate $50, you are entered into a door prize of, and you could win up to $1,000. But we encourage you to give as much as you would have if you went to our live community benefit raffle. So that wraps up our show. Bob, I hope you stay safe and healthy during the rest of coronavirus and in a few months, we'll all be looking in our rear view mirror on coronavirus.
Hopefully.
Thanks so much. Happy
Okay.
holidays and take care, everybody.
Bye now.
Bye, Catherine.